Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Susan Kaufman, and I'm here today for Attitude Magazine's ADHD experts. If I had to pick one area that makes life really difficult for so many people with attention deficit disorder, it would be sleep. Waking up too early, problems falling asleep, inability to wake up and get up in the morning, and so many other personal twists on sleep disorders. Sleep as trouble rather than restorative. It's just the bane of existence for many of our readers at Attitude. So today we're really pleased to have Roberto Olivardia, Ph.D., who will talk about, his topic is why ADHDers can't sleep and what can we do about it. Welcome, Dr. Olivardia. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Susan. I'm a big fan of Attitude Magazine and very happy to do this webinar. And in my work with people with ADHD and particularly with children, the issue I hear a lot from parents and people who struggle with ADHD is the issue with sleep. And in fact, I mean, I don't know anyone with ADHD that doesn't have some issue or problem with sleep, myself included. Wow. I have ADHD, and I have a lot of the sleep issues that I'm going to be talking about today. For starters, when we think about sleep, it is, as you mentioned, essential. I mean, proper sleep hygiene is really essential for our good health. That when we think about what are the things that really help ground us and regulate us, we have to eat well, we need to sleep well, we need to sort of keep our lives in a way that's manageably, that our stress level isn't getting too high. And if we're not sleeping well, that puts everything out of whack. It affects our appetite, it affects our stress level, it affects our frustration tolerance, our ability to regulate emotions, our focus, our concentrations, and there's no question that if you have ADHD, having problems with sleep is only going to exacerbate all of your ADHD symptoms. Certainly, even for people who don't have ADHD, not getting a good night's sleep could result in a loss of concentration, lower energy, lower motivation. So when you have individuals who already struggle with those issues, people with ADHD, those sleep problems are going to make it a lot worse. Now, when we talk about what are the common sleep issues for people with ADHD, there are many. So typically we hear, the most common I hear are the difficulty in getting to sleep or falling asleep. And this is something that even parents will retrospectively tell you that when their children were infants, it was still a problem for them to get to sleep at night. So this is something that doesn't just develop when we're 10 years old. I mean, this is something that's pretty hardwired. People will often report that it's very hard to shut off their brains, that they have a lot of racing thoughts, that they just have a very, very hard time going to sleep. And we'll talk a little bit more about what theories as to why that is. In addition, it could be staying asleep could be the problem. Some of my patients have no problem falling asleep, but they might wake up at random times throughout the night, or they wake up at 3 in the morning and it's as if they're just ready to start the day. They have a very hard time maintaining a consistent level of sleep. For other people, it's they might have no problem getting to sleep, or they might have problems getting to sleep as well as waking up in the morning. They feel like complete zombies, even with ample amounts of sleep. I remember in high school, even when I was getting 8-9 hours of sleep, I would have an alarm clock literally ringing in my ear, and it would not wake me up. I mean, it was as if I was in a coma. And it's almost as if the brain is just not ready and the body is not ready to wake up in the morning, which makes life very difficult if you have to get to school, and as evident by the fact that I was late a lot in high school, it can be a real problem, and especially for adults who have to get to work at a certain time. And it seems like with any of these problems, very almost infantile sometimes when adults say, oh, I had a problem waking up in the morning, and people who don't understand this problem could easily minimize that and laugh it off and just say, oh, well, don't we all? But no, it really is a problem for people with ADHD. In addition, there's something called the primary disorder of vigilance, which refers to individuals with ADHD who have a problem staying alert throughout the day. So they might find that their level of alertness is highly dependent upon how stimulating a situation is. So if they're stimulated, if they feel energized, they're they're right on, but if they are bored or if they are feeling disconnected, they literally start falling asleep. And it's almost been called like a borderline narcolepsy. And I definitely have experienced this many times in my life, and particularly in school settings where if I was in a lecture hall, I could have gotten plenty of sleep. I could have been totally awake the hour before, very stimulated perhaps in the class before, but if I was in a class that just didn't kind of arouse me enough, then I was asleep. I mean, full-blown, like in REM sleep, drooling down my neck. I mean, it would hit me that hard. In addition to these sleep issues, sleep disorders are very common in people with ADHD. Things like narcolepsy, sleepwalking, sleep talking, bruxism, which is teeth grinding, restless leg syndrome, and in particular a sleep disorder known as sleep apnea, which sleep apnea is basically where we are either not breathing, which is called an apnea, for a period of time, or our oxygen levels are so desaturated because we're not breathing enough that often can result in heavy snoring. But sleep apnea is a very, very serious sleep disorder, and one in which definitely needs to be treated. And it turns out many people with ADHD have sleep apnea. And we think of sleep apnea as, for a lot of people, is more weight-related, and that could be the case for people who are obese, certainly have higher prevalence or higher risk of sleep apnea. However, sleep apnea could occur in anybody. If you have the right or wrong anatomy, you can struggle with this. So as myself, when I had a sleep study in 2006, found out that I had severe off-the-charts sleep apnea, and it turns out I had a severely deviated septum in my nose. My tonsils are extra large, the back of my tongue is extra thick, and my uvula is extra large. So basically, when I was sleeping, my tonsils were touching each other, and I was getting no oxygen down my throat, and my nose was only capable of 30% oxygen capacity. So I basically was not sleeping throughout most of my life, and I was one of those snorers that would, people would call me a chainsaw, and I'll talk about later what we can do about that. So what's important to know is that all of these issues are highly seen in the population, but we also see it in empirical studies. So in scientific studies, this is all validated, and what I found very helpful as someone with ADHD and someone who has a bevy of sleep disorders and problems, that it was so validating to look into the scientific literature and see a plethora of studies that show these highly significant relationships between ADHD and sleep disorders and sleep problems, that this isn't just an issue of will, that there is something going on in terms of the chemistry, in terms of this dynamic that makes it very difficult. And I mean, there are a number of studies that have looked at children, adolescents, adults, and when compared to non-ADHD counterparts, those with ADHD are significantly off the charts, are more likely to suffer from a sleep problem, a sleep disorder. And again, it could be any of the ones I mentioned already: sleep talking, sleepwalking, frequent awakenings, trouble getting to bed. And even when compared to other psychiatric disorders like depression or anxiety disorders, that those with ADHD still rank highest in sleep problems. So even when you're looking at other mental health diagnoses, you'll still see these very robust associations of sleep problems in those with ADHD. Now, what's even more validating is when you understand why that might be. And there are biological, behavioral, psychological factors that all really contribute to what can predispose people with ADHD to have sleep problems. So in a nutshell, even biologically, ADHD involves, we have various neurotransmitters, which are chemical messengers in our brain. And ADHD involves two main chemical messenger systems, what we call the dopaminergic or dopamine systems and the serotonin systems. And it turns out that sleep, the regulation of proper sleep, the serotonin is implicated in sleep. So if you have ADHD, which has some dysregulation of serotonin, it's going to dysregulate other processes that the brain is implicated in with that same neurotransmitter. So we know that sleep involves serotonin, that's probably going to be sort of riled a bit. We also know that the disruption in serotonin systems can disrupt sleep. It can influence or exacerbate ADHD symptoms. In addition, what's fascinating is many people, and this can be found scientifically through a sleep study, people with ADHD actually have circadian rhythm abnormalities. So circadian rhythms are basically the pattern of the process of how we sleep. And a normal circadian rhythm would be when the sun goes down at night at about 10 or 11 o'clock, our brains start to get tired. Our brains start to realize, okay, it's nighttime, I should be going to sleep right now. We get a certain level of melatonin that is secreted into our system that gets our body ready to go to sleep. Well, for many people with ADHD, they'll report to you that at about 10 o'clock at night, instead of feeling that, they're feeling energized. They're feeling like they're rising up. And if anything, they don't start to feel that until about 2 in the morning. And this was my life for many, many years of my life, and still is on a very natural basis. I just have to work at it now. But I would always tell people that my ideal hours of sleep were between 2 a.m. and about 9 a.m. That if I could sleep, if that were my hours of sleep, but the world doesn't work that way for most people. And when I got a sleep study, I in fact found out that I have what's called a delayed sleep phase syndrome, which actually shows that my circadian rhythms are hardwired to not start to go to sleep until about 2 in the morning, which I found very validating because I attributed all of that to other factors, which certainly are influenced by that, but to know that my brain actually has a sort of hard wiring for that. And for many people with ADD, they find that there are these other biological mechanisms of these circadian rhythm abnormalities that contribute, not only with something like a delayed sleep phase syndrome, but I've had patients who have had sleep studies and have found that they never enter REM sleep. And REM is the dream, the part of sleep where we dream, but it's also the most important part of our sleep that gives us that restorative, refreshing feeling when we wake up. And if you don't hit REM sleep, you're not going to feel refreshed in the morning. So I remember having a patient years ago who had a sleep study, did not have sleep apnea, did not have a lot of these other, but they found he went through stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and then after 4 you're supposed to hit REM sleep. And he just altogether skipped the REM stage, and they were baffled by it. And it made a lot of sense as to why he wasn't feeling so refreshed in the morning, and he happened to have ADHD. Genetically, there are also evidence as we're learning more and more about genetic mapping. There is a gene called catechol-methyltransferase, or COMT, which is a gene that basically encodes an enzyme that inactivates dopamine. Now, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that we want to have a certain amount of, and it helps us in terms of regulating sleep. And the COMT, in a sense, inactivates what we should have as a normal level of dopamine in the brain, and it's highly associated with ADHD. And we also know that we just inherit our genes from our parents, so people who have poor sleep issues or sleep disorders often will have a parent that has a sleep problem, and we know that ADHD is also highly, highly heritable. It's very important to get a full assessment of all of our sleep problems. When meeting with a new patient, I not only ask them how much they sleep, but I ask them what those hours of sleep are, whether they've ever had a sleep study, what different sleep issues or problems they have. Of course, you look at things like, have they had caffeine? Are they sleeping in a comfortable bed? You know, really getting a full assessment of those sleep challenges are very, very important. And in terms of what to do, and I know that people will have a lot of questions that I can expand on all of these things in terms of treatment implications, but the good news is that with some effort, that you can make some interventions and strategies that can really help you in getting a good night's sleep and really setting up your environment. And how I always talk about ADHD is those of us with ADHD, we internally don't have the systems. Like I don't think I'll ever have the kind of body that naturally will want to go to bed at 10 o'clock at night. Even with, I have a CPAP machine because I have severe sleep apnea. Even with that, it's an effort for me to get to bed every night. And I just accept that. And I recognize that I have to set up my external environment to basically inform my brain, okay, it's time for sleep. So that includes things like unplugging, being aware of not watching highly stimulating TV shows or video games or YouTube or all of those things that really can be very stimulating. Using sound machines or light music can be very helpful, particularly because in going to sleep, I could have so many different thoughts about various projects I want to work on. It could be something I'm anxious about. It could be a food that I want to eat the next day. And if I have light music going on, it's almost as if your brain is connected to some stimulation, but not a stimulation that's actually going to rev it up. And it's enough that it's anchoring the body and the mind to say, okay, I can fall asleep right now. Dark rooms, darkening shades, dimming the lights, very, very important. If there's any light, it could alert the brain to say, okay, there's light, there's something to be done right now. Not engaging in any highly stimulating behavior right before bed. Now, we could talk more about what that is. Now, some people might say, like exercise, for example, could be, for some people with ADD, a really good thing to do hours before they go to sleep because it tires them out. For other people, that will completely wake them up. And just a brief note before we get into questions about stimulant medication is there's a lot of the jury is out in terms of stimulant medication can sometimes exacerbate these problems, but I've also seen it greatly help these issues. I mean, to the degree that there's a high percentage of people with ADHD who sometimes can take a full dose of their stimulant medication an hour before going to sleep, and they will get a better night's sleep that night. A lot of times prescribers are very hesitant to prescribe stimulants right before bed because they assume it's going to keep you up. That's not always the case. In fact, if the stimulant medication enables you to focus better on going to sleep, your body is more likely to get to sleep. And people have anecdotally, and I've anecdotally seen this as well, where sometimes if I have a little bit of coffee, and I'm not talking like a large big cup of coffee, but sometimes just a little bit of coffee, I think the caffeine in it acts very similarly, where it actually enables me sometimes to focus on just getting to sleep. Now, for other people, that might not be the case. So one has to be wary of how the medication fits into that. But most of the time, it can be very helpful. But sometimes it can, for individuals, it keeps them up at night, which we certainly don't want. And in those cases, in talking with your prescriber about adjusting either the dosage or the time of day that you're taking that dosage. So in a nutshell, this is a problem, as we know, that these sleep problems are very big in the ADHD population, and I'm very interested to hear what people's thoughts and questions are in working through the struggles of sleep.
Okay. That's a great introduction. Very, as you say, very reassuring to hear that this is such a widespread aspect of ADHD, and you put your finger on so many of the things that people have posted about. Can you talk a little bit more about sleep hygiene? You know, I know we're all always told, and at least I've heard this so many times, you know, dim the lights, don't engage in screen time and so forth. But I know for me and for my daughter, who also suffers from serious inability to fall asleep, these things just don't seem to work. You know, you still lie there wide awake.
Yes.
What happens at that point?
Absolutely. What I tell people is you really have to think of it as you have your toolbox of strategies, and some days or some nights rather, one or two of these strategies are all you need. Other times you might need 4 or 5 of them. Other days you might not have a problem. You could go to sleep even with a night light on, and other times if the smallest amount of light triggers it. And I think that's what's important in general with ADHD is how to, it's almost like you almost have to be flexible with yourself and not be overly frustrated, because what's difficult, and this is true for anybody, is that it is the worst feeling to be in bed and you just are waiting to fall asleep, and it's not like you're really doing anything. You're supposed to just surrender to the night, and that's a very hard thing for me to do, to just do nothing. Like, it's like
really hard. I know.
yeah, and so I have to work at it, and I tell people too, to work at sleep hygiene is not right when you're going to sleep. It's working at it hours before. So, for example, you know, I think of like right after I eat dinner, I'm sort of already thinking about, okay, what do I need to do? So, for example, changing into the clothes you're going to be sleeping in, not just right before you go to bed, but hours before. It's basically, again, setting up this external cue of, okay, I'm going to sleep, being aware of what activities you're engaging in, or picking activities that might be soothing for you. Things like, you know, for some people taking a bath can be very helpful. Other people that would be too stimulating. Reading a book could be very helpful for some people. Others it's going to be too stimulating. And that's the thing, that one size doesn't fit all. So I find that changing into the sleeping clothes, being aware of you know, what I'm looking at or what kind of work I start getting involved with. That's the other thing, is that because I can be very productive in the nighttime, and I have. I mean, I got through college and grad school because I was basically nocturnal, and I was able to get an amazing amount of work done in the nighttime. And there's a psychological component to this as well, that many people with ADD will tell you that they love the nighttime because there are no distractions. Nobody's going, or I mean, I should say less distractions. Nobody's going to be calling them at 2 in the morning. There's no expectation really that you're supposed to be doing anything except sleep. And I think for many of us with ADD, we look at sleep as being unproductive time, and there's a part of me that, despite everything I've just said, there's a part of me that still feels that way, and I have to fight that, because I know logically that's not the case. My body has been through the ringer at times in my life where I have really been sleep deprived. I mean, your body does very, very strange things when it doesn't get enough sleep. And so I know scientifically I have to get sleep, but there's a part of me, every time I go to sleep, I think, I could be up one more hour, and exactly, and I could be getting these 5 extra things done, and I have to fight that.
It's like the same feeling that we ADHDers have about getting to appointments early. You might just sit there and waste time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That always really bugs me. I want to be there exactly at the moment, and not 5 minutes early. But yeah.
Exactly. And so it's doing those things, being aware sometimes of diet. I mean, sometimes that can make a case. I mean, certainly watching your caffeine level, you know, being aware again of lights and the brightness of rooms. A lot of relaxation exercises can be very helpful. Deep breathing, something called progressive muscle relaxation, or PMR. People can look that up. It's basically involves tightening and tensing certain muscle groups for 7 to 10 seconds and then releasing it. And it really can get your body into a very relaxed state, which could be very, very helpful. Climate control is also important. Many people with ADD tend to run hot by nature, and so a lot of times keeping a room cooler is often better, because that way it makes being in the covers and being warm more advantageous, that you don't want to sort of get out of bed in a way. And when I talked about the music, I recommend music that is often instrumental, and often putting the same song on repeat. Like not even a full album, because that's the novelty of every new song could be enough to keep somebody up. So keeping, you know, an instrumental piece of music on repeat over and over and over and over again, the mind almost just, it's again connected to it enough that it sort of can anchor you down, but at the same time is not going to be overstimulating for the person.
Well, what's your feeling about melatonin? A number of people have asked about whether taking melatonin, what kind of dose for children, when to take it, what's your advice on that?
Melatonin, the studies show that it's quite safe and quite effective, and of course I would always, tell people to check with their primary care physician, or for parents to always check with their pediatrician, because there might be something that might make it contraindicated. But for the most part, it's very safe, very effective. Studies have shown it can significantly advance sleep onset and really help people get to sleep quicker. Typically, for people who take it, it's best to be taken about an hour before you really want to start to get to sleep, because you need your body to metabolize it. But the thing that's important also is melatonin is more helpful in terms of regulating sleep cycles, as opposed to like a classic sleep aid. That what melatonin really does is it helps regulate those circadian rhythms and that cycle, to kind of get your body used to, okay, when we have a level of melatonin, that sets off all these different processes that can help us go to sleep. But if people take it, let's say, the moment that they're in bed, it can take sometimes up to 2 hours later before it really sort of kicks in. And as far as dosage, it really varies between different people, different weights and such. So I always would defer to have people just consult with their medical doctor or primary care physician in terms of dosage. But I know people who take it, including children, who take it on a nightly basis and do absolutely fine with it. But there are such things as melatonin overdoses that people just want to be aware of in terms of making sure that they're not taking too much.
Okay. I mean, some of the questions are, is it dangerous to take melatonin on a sustained basis? I mean, one person whose child's been taking it for years. I mean,
no, there's no research that shows that when the body, if the body really rejects it, you'll know often very early on. I mean, people who might get rashes or allergic reactions or things like that. But no, the studies actually show that it can be a very safe, very effective tool for people to use, even over a long period of time.
Okay. Some of the parents on that, I really feel for you guys. Some of the parents on this webinar have posted some amazing stories about children who wake up wide awake at 3 a.m. and get into all kinds of mischief, just, can't go back to sleep. If you're a parent and this is your child roaming around the house at 3 a.m., what do you advise?
That's very tough, and I feel for parents. And as a parent I have 2 young children, and one of them definitely is ADHD, and another one is probably in the area as well. Neither of my kids slept through the night until they were a year and a half old, and my wife and I were basically very sleep deprived. And it was always a strange thing, because of course you hear from other parents that when their kids are 4 months old, they're like, oh, he's finally sleeping through the night. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh.
Wow.
It is very, very difficult. And with that, I think first and foremost, it's important, to understand that this is, that this is very hardwired, this is very biological. Even if a child is sort of trying to get into stuff, it's not easy to just say, okay, go to sleep, if somebody's body is just not in that place. So if it happens on a consistent basis, I would question whether there is a sleep disorder, because even with something like sleep apnea, for example, that many people who have undiagnosed sleep apnea will often either have a very hard time falling asleep or get up too early. And one of the theories for that is the body would rather be awake than to be in this sort of period where it's essentially suffocating. I mean, that's what happens when you have sleep apnea, is that, and it puts, it can cause tremendous damage over time to the heart. Now, when we're younger, we can recover from that very easily. But when I got diagnosed with sleep apnea, I remember my events were so high, and I was in my early 30s at the time, and the doctor wanted me to go through all these cardiac tests, because she said with the level of sleep apnea that I had, she wouldn't be surprised if my heart already had sustained some damage. Luckily, it did not. But sometimes the body will prefer to just be awake. So I would always, again, if this happens on a consistent basis, to look at perhaps getting a sleep study. But initially, sometimes even just having if the child wakes up, it's not unusual for people who are healthy 8 to 9 hour sleepers to have a period of time, and it could be a couple minutes, where they actually are awake in the night, but a lot of people don't remember this. They don't remember this period. That's normal, even in normal sleep. Now, for those with ADHD, it could be that even when they're getting an adequate amount of sleep, that period where they're awake, it's almost like now it's like all lights on, like they're fully awake, like their body is just has now assumed it's the beginning of the day. So sometimes even having the child do a very sort of non-stimulating, very soothing activity, trying to keeping the lights low, something that's going to sort of keep them grounded, because their natural tendency might be to just get up and start walking around, and a lot of times that's only going to arouse their system even more, and now their body is really feeling that it's awake. So maybe setting up for young children, setting up reward systems if they stay in bed when they have that sort of wake-up time, and if they can stay in bed for however many hours, they get a certain prize or things like that that can motivate them, that staying in bed will be more rewarding for them than getting up and starting whatever mischief, that they want to start. And for also, for kids as well, as making sure that they're not having liquids after a certain time. Bedwetting is a common problem for kids with ADHD. And part of that is the opposite problem, is that they're not waking up when they should. And that can happen as well. So again, we see this dysregulation, that with bedwetting, the main problem is that your bladder is you're about to go to the bathroom, and for many of us, we wake up. Our bodies say, ooh, you got to wake up and go. And for many people with ADHD, they're just zonked, where they can't get up.
Right, absolutely, yeah. Pamela just posted, Dr. Olivardia may just have saved my marriage. She says she has ADD, and her husband, who does not, wants to go to sleep with a light on and watching TV. And she says this, even though the alarm clock is enough to draw to her attention. So she's really glad that you validated her perception, and she wasn't just being picky.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think that brings up an excellent point, Susan, is that it's essential when you are in a marriage, when you're in a relationship, to talk about this with your partner, because and I agree, I'm the same way. I cannot have an alarm clock that has sort of digital, the light from that will be even too much. And to let your partner know, look, this really is a problem. Like, it might seem like I'm just being picky, or it might seem like I'm just being, a nag or whatnot, but no, I really need it dark. Like, I need to have, and if he, wants to watch TV, he should probably go into another room, to do it. But it's so important to have that kind of communication, because for people who don't struggle with something like sleep, or ADHD for that matter, it is, and I feel for them, because it can be hard to understand how something that is so effortless for so many people. I mean, going to sleep is just effortless for a lot of people. It takes tremendous effort for me to get to sleep every night, and to explain that to someone almost sounds silly, but that's what it is. I mean, my brain is just wired that way, and it's very important for partners to know that, so that there can be, because this can produce a really big problem in a relationship if someone isn't understanding that.
Yes, Jennifer says, your personal sleep issues, excluding the sleep apnea, sound exactly like her. She says one of her biggest problems is she's just not that interested in sleeping. Which is fine. I think that's great. I agree with you. Who would want to sleep, right? Waste all that time? She said, I'm alert and wide awake at midnight. The last thing I want to do is work on sleep hygiene. How can I change my attitude?
Absolutely. And that's a good one, because I think this is where what's important, because even with people we're in relationships with, or doctors might say, well, see, this is an issue of will. Like, you just don't want to go to sleep.
Try harder. Right.
Try harder. And there's an element of that that's true, but the element of that is true, but it's piggybacking on the fact that our biology is wired this way, to the fact that it's even possible. Like, when I tell people that for years, I mean, it was only until fairly recently that I was going to bed prior to 1, 2 in the morning, and waking up at 6:30 in the morning, and functioning throughout the day. I mean, the thing is also is that I'm in a career, I'm a psychologist, I'm in a career that I love. I love people. I find my work highly stimulating. So it wouldn't affect me perhaps in the same way that if I were in a different job, and a job that I even liked slightly less, I could be rendered dysfunctional, because if my, I have enough adrenaline because I just love what I do that it sort of keeps me going. Now that's not to say though that there aren't consequences to that. I mean, I have to be aware, and I think as I'm hitting my 40s and everything, being aware of, like, I have to really pay attention to this because I want to live a very long, and healthy life. But absolutely, I mean, I have the same psychological belief of, like, every night I think, oh, I could get this, and this done, but I really should get sleep because then it'll make it better for my health in general. And I could, and so initially what I tell people is, even if you have, if let's say 7 nights a week you're really just going to bed way too late, even if you can commit to 2 or 3 nights a week that you make sure you get to bed at a certain time, so that at least your body is getting some of that, and then you sort of slowly add to that. But in terms of what sleep studies show is that if, let's say, you're someone who typically goes to bed at 2 a.m., that you won't be able to just go to bed at 10 p.m. the next night, that it's really in 20-minute intervals that we can begin to work with our circadian rhythm. So if you go to bed at 2 a.m., and you're trying to aim to get to bed by 11 p.m., then aim the next night to get to sleep by 1:40, the next night 1:20, the next night 1 a.m., the next night 12:40. And in 20-minute intervals, that seems to be sort of the workable thing that helps our circadian rhythms say, okay, I can go with this, because if it's too jolting, we might be able to get to bed at 11 p.m. the next night, but it won't be consistent because our brains are not going to do that. The other thing to keep in mind is that sleep and eating and weight go hand in hand, and I specialize in the treatment of eating disorders as well, and see a lot of people who have problems with weight and with eating, and obesity is a big problem in the ADHD community, and part of that is the sleep deprivation, that when we're not sleeping adequately, our body will actually hold on to body fat in a much more conservative way. It doesn't want to let go of the body fat, and our bodies also crave carbs, sugars, and fats more than when we are sleeping adequately. So our metabolism will start to drop because our bodies assume if we're not sleeping, it's because there isn't an adequate food supply and that we need to get more food. Because if you think about real basic needs, we need to sleep, eat, and drink water. And so if we're not sleeping, then our body assumes that one of those other two processes are in jeopardy. So it will often conserve body fat, and sometimes, like, I know that the first month I started using the CPAP after getting diagnosed with sleep apnea, I lost 12 pounds in a month by doing nothing except using the CPAP. I didn't change my diet. I didn't exercise more. And that is very common for a lot of people when they start using the CPAP, and the reason is my body was actually sleeping, and my body was trusting that I didn't need to conserve those calories in the same way. So it's really important, I think, to kind of be aware too, and I sometimes will look in the literature and see the correlations of sleep problems and medical issues. There's new research being done looking at sleep issues and risk of cancer and things like that. I almost have to scare myself a little bit, but it's worth it actually, because
it may be a waste of time, but
But
right. But it's going to let you live for a long time, healthy life.
Exactly.
It's amazing. Lots of questions here about all manner of sleep aids, from Benadryl to Trazodone to Clonidine to the whole list. Do you have any point of view on chemical intervention, as it were?
Sure. I mean, all of those things can people use, and I tell people of course always consult with their psychiatrist around it, but I tell people there's no shame in taking or using a sleep aid, because ultimately you need to sleep. I mean, it's so important to get that sleep that they can be very helpful. where it can be problematic for people is if they either develop a tolerance for the medication and they need more and more of it. And some of these can be habit forming, so people want to be careful about that. Some of them work wonderfully for some people, like clonidine has been found to be very helpful for a number of individuals. But some individuals find that when they use that with methylphenidate, for example, it can produce certain side effects. And so with any of these things, it's very, very important to sort of work, even if you're taking a sleep aid or a medication, you still want to work at it behaviorally. It doesn't mean that you're off the hook in terms of like, okay, I'm going to go on YouTube and I'm going to watch The Amazing Race, which I love that show, but watching it right before going to bed is not the best thing to do. You know, it's not like I'm going to partake in all that and then just take, you know, medication. That the medication, you know, you want it as one of many things that you're doing in terms of an overall treatment plan.
Okay. Jill says, how do you get resistant children to go along with this sleep routine? That's where the bribery comes in, right?
Yeah, very, very tough. I mean, first is I think it's very important to let them know that that you understand that it's hard for them. And it might seem kind of silly, but it really can go a long way, because what often happens is this sort of battle of, you know, you need to go to sleep, and the kid is saying, there's nothing in my body right now that is telling me that I need to go to sleep, so you're wrong. And this is where then it just, you know, you're just hitting your head against the wall, versus if you say, you know what, now this also depends on how parents might even talk to their kids about ADHD. I'm a very firm believer in using the name, in defining it, you know, for the child, reducing and eliminating all the shame around it. That's why I love Attitude Magazine, because I think you guys do an amazing job with that. And so to say, you know, those of us, and if you're a parent who also has ADHD, as I am, I say to my son, you know, those of us with ADHD, sleep is a tough relationship. It's a very twisted kind of relationship, and I understand, because I don't always want to go to sleep when I go to sleep, but I know I have to, and these are the reasons. And you try to find something that's meaningful for that child. So it could be, if your child cares about school, to say, you know, it will make you a better student. If they care about their athletic performance, to say, you will be a better athlete if you get better sleep, trust me. And there are studies that show it. Or you know, you're so creative and you're such a great musician that I know that you'll have more ideas of what to write or what to do if you get better sleep. So you have to make it meaningful for them, because to just say you need sleep means nothing. I mean, like, even for adult, I mean, think about it. I mean, as an adult, even someone telling me that, it's like I have to scare myself sometimes into getting, you know, sleep. And so, I mean, as an adult, I could be still resistant to it. So to a child who feels immortal, I mean, children feel like they're going to live forever. So the idea that it's unhealthy means just nothing to them. So you have to make it sort of meaningful. And then you can start, if your child is still very resistant, add like a reward system of, if you go to bed at this time, you'll get, you know, this many points. And if you go to bed at this time, which would be even more ideal, you'll get more points. And then when they accumulate a certain number of points, they can get a certain prize that, you know, that you decide would be appropriate, you know, for that child. And then there's a higher motivation now. So if the child is like, ooh, I could have fun being up, they now have a higher level of motivation that say, but if I go to sleep, I might be able to get the X, Y, and Z, you know, that I wanted. And then when they get to sleep, their bodies are now becoming more and more programmed and more used to needing that sleep, which is really important. So you can actually sort of work at kind of almost not necessarily rewiring, that's too strong a word, but at sort of bending it so that they actually will start to get used to that more and more. And I've seen that certainly with my son, where, you know, he is tired. He is more tired at the level of the time that I want him, you know, to be tired. But it took a while. It took a long time.
Can we talk a bit about stimulant ADHD medications and their relationship to sleep? We hear oftentimes people will say, my child can't sleep because of the stimulant medications. And then other people will say, Dr. Dodson has often recommended that people try stimulant medication in order to help them sleep, to test it to see whether, in fact, it calms down all the noise in the head and So
Yes.
what's your point of view on that? I guess it's a trial and error thing for most people.
It really is. I mean, there are studies, I recall a study that was done in 2008 that found that treatment with methylphenidate resulted in better sleep efficiency. People felt more restorative when they woke up in the morning. They found, and that was a very solid study done by Sabansky and colleagues that found a very robust association with using the medication and helping people sleep. Then you see studies that find the opposite, and then there have actually been several large double-blind trials, and a double-blind study means that you have your research subjects. Some are getting the real medication, some are getting a placebo, but they don't know whether they're getting the real thing or the placebo, and the experimenter doesn't know that they're getting the real thing or the placebo, so that there's no even risk of any even subtle clues or indicators that a person is getting the real medication. And those are the most solid kind of studies. And when there have been those kind of double-blind studies that look at methylphenidate that's administered once daily versus methylphenidate that's administered 3 times daily versus a placebo, a lot of those studies find no significant difference amongst any of those groups. So it's not even like that there's this one size fits all. It could really be very individual. Now, one of my patients I have who, when he takes his stimulant closer to bedtime, he says it's not that he feels awake and aroused because of the stimulant per se. Like, he doesn't feel like revved up. Like, he doesn't feel like the stimulant is acting like an amphetamine. He said what it does, though, is it makes him focus better on things that might have been difficult for him to focus on earlier in the day, and he doesn't want to lose that. Like, he wants to take advantage of, I am now finally focused, and I can either do this work that I want to do, or he likes to build models of things. Like, I can now build model. I can engage in my hobbies better. I can sit and watch my favorite program without getting up every 2 minutes. So the stimulant is doing its job, but unfortunately it's not helping the person get to sleep. It's helping them focus better on anything but going to sleep. And then I have other patients who, one of my patients recently who started taking basically his full dose of stimulants an hour before bedtime, and he's never slept as good as he has doing that.
Wow.
Because
wow.
he says that I'm in bed and I don't have the racing thoughts, I don't have the anxieties that I would be thinking about, and I'm actually focused on just falling asleep, and I just fall right into sleep. So it really, unfortunately, is a trial and error. It really depends on the person.
Well, that sounds like there's someone on the webinar named Lolly, and she says, I took my second daily dose of Adderall late the other night and worked very productively after her boy's bedtime, went right to sleep at midnight, slept through the night for a change, and felt great. So there's an example of someone for whom a late dose seems to have worked effectively.
Yeah.
Also note that for her, saying she went right to sleep at midnight was a breakthrough, which would be an ADD person, right? If everybody else is asleep at 10 or whatever. Yeah, I'm with you. Can you talk? I'm curious about this relationship between sleep apnea and ADHD. How could that be? I mean, sleep apnea is caused by nasal,
yes,
problems or whatever. What could be the relationship there?
It's a good question. We don't know, because certainly if, one theory might be that, could it be that these sort of anatomical issues and these sleep apnea can either give rise, not necessarily cause AD, although I have to say, I mean, when I was first diagnosed, my sleep doctor said, you might not actually have ADHD, like you could just be severely sleep deprived. And I said, well, if you're at my house, with my family at Thanksgiving, you'll know that I definitely have ADHD. The apple does not fall far from the tree. So there's no question. However, I have worked with people who, in fact, don't have ADHD. They just have really severe sleep apnea. But we don't know why that would be. That is it just that, even maybe the intensity of even the effect of the sleep apnea, because even when it's treated, and what's interesting is that for some people with sleep apnea, all you need to do is yank the tonsils out. I had my deviated septum fixed in my nose, but for some people that's all that they need to do for it to be effective, and for other people it doesn't do anything, interestingly. It's only about 50% effective to get those surgeries, and I had the deviated septum fixed because that also can help with the daytime alertness, and I have found without a doubt it definitely does. But I still can fall asleep if I'm bored enough, but I do notice it takes me a lot longer than it used to because I'm just probably breathing better. But we don't know. We don't know why. It's almost like you know, anecdotally, I haven't seen any scientific studies that have looked at this, but anecdotally, you'll often hear of the rate of ear infections, like a lot of kids with ADHD had very severe ear infections, and we don't know necessarily why that would be. I mean, there's got to be something, you know, and I think too, because I had chronic ear infections as a kid. I had 3 surgeries on my ears, putting tubes in my ears, and my doctor wondered whether my sleep apnea might have been a contributing cause to just the whole ear, nose, and throat system was just completely dysregulated, and that makes a lot of sense because I used to have really bad like sinusitis, and I don't have any of those problems now. I mean, interestingly, since using the sleep
That's really interesting.
So I think there's a lot more that we need to do in terms of research to understand that.
Coming back to this connection between ADHD, insomnia, and eating carbohydrates, there are two people, interestingly. One's called kindergarten teacher, another one's called mom with love, and they both have very similar problems in that they wake up in the night, go downstairs, and just are ravenous for carbohydrates. One person says she doesn't even realize it. She finds empty food containers. Other times she's woken up with food in the bed. She says she's a healthy eater. She's a runner. She gets lots of exercise. She just can't figure out what's going on here. And the other person says, I have no trouble falling asleep, but wake up every 90 minutes, ravenous for carbohydrates, have gained a huge amount of weight.
Yes. There is a term called sleep eating disorder that's been sort of anecdotally used, and both the eating disorder community and the ADHD community is starting to look at this because this is a real phenomenon. And I think a lot of, initially, these individuals were being dismissed as pretending that they were sleepwalking, and in fact, you know, they were just binge eating. And what we find is that we know that things like sleepwalking, sleep talking tend to be more common in people with ADHD, that it's a combination of them sleepwalking and for whatever reason they're eating in their sleep, or even for people who aren't sleepwalking, I mean, they're fully conscious, they just wake up and their bodies are starving. Now what that usually means is that, again, there's some dysregulation there. So again, our appetite and our circadian rhythms are often in sync with each other. So what I make sure of is doing a full assessment of their sleep, but also their eating habits. Is this someone who skips meals, for example, throughout the day? So for many people with ADD, if they're in hyper-focus mode, they might not eat for like 10 hours, and then they're just like starving. So one, I always look at, is this person getting all the nutrition that they should be getting throughout the day, number one. Number two is, even, you know, if they are, is being very aware of their sleep cycles, because if your sleep is very erratic, again, for some people, your body is going to be more prone to feeling like it needs to eat, and that's why it's waking up. That's why, even if it's not waking up for that reason, I mean, one might not actually be hungry, but the body just sort of starts responding in these ways as if it needs to eat and it needs food. And what I've had some patients do is, particularly those who are not conscious of it, is sometimes they will sort of lock, I mean by lock, they'll put like a stick or something like between the refrigerator, make it difficult, set something up that makes it hard for them to, that will sort of wake them more into consciousness in order to do that. If you have a loved one, having them, you know, be aware of if you know, are getting out of bed. I've had some people where right outside their bed, when they step out of their bed, they'll have like a squeaky toy, sort of like what you would give a dog. So if they step, the squeaky toy makes a sound and will sort of wake them up into consciousness. And then for those individuals who are already conscious, it's really important that, I mean, if their stomach is growling, the thing is that the more we engage in a behavior, the more our body's going to try to accommodate that and be reinforced. So the more we eat at 3 in the morning, the more our body expects that we're going to be eating at 3 in the morning, and it just becomes a cycle.
It becomes a pattern, yeah.
It becomes a very bad pattern. And then also during the day, people might notice that they're not eating as much during the day because they ate sometimes a full meal at 3 in the morning, and so they eat less, but that only is then going to reinforce that night that they're going to be hungry because their body needs a certain amount of nutrition in a day. So in those cases, you know, people might, I will work with people around maybe having something that they don't have to go down in their kitchen for, something that might be a little snack, and then we eventually sort of pare it down where they're not eating, you know, anything during the day, during the nighttime, and making sure that we're regulating their eating patterns throughout the day. If someone's exercising, it could be that they require and need more fuel. When we exercise, we burn a lot of calories. Our bodies might need more protein or more carbohydrates. Because people typically during these episodes are not eating or binging on broccoli or carrots that they're often eating.
Right.
They're eating all the good stuff.
About carbs. Yeah.
Exactly, all the carbohydrates.
Wanted to bring up the question of college students. I know anecdotally from my own college students and also from the people posting on the site that a lot of college students have a really difficult time, especially with ADD, have a really tough time. There's no structure. People are up and about all the time. They're awake all night. They miss class. We've even had, you know, here at Attitude, several people whose kids have just bombed out of college within the first semester or second year due to this kind of sleep disorder, really, as much as anything. And it's so hard for parents because, of course, you're not there. And nowhere under today's privacy laws can you even usually talk to the school about your child. So how do you work? Do you work with college kids at all, or their parents?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. And it is a big problem. And, you know, even the idea of all the executive functions, I mean, it's hard enough for someone with ADHD when there is always something going on, you know, and I remember my freshman year of college that there was always somebody up. You know, if it was 2 in the morning, I can walk down the hall and somebody was in the common room, and you could get into really cool discussions and philosophical conversations, and, you know, so the motivation was like, I'm having a ball, I'm having a great time. The problem is then, you know, you have to get to class the next morning and you have to write the papers and you have to do all of that. Now, there's a lot of college campuses actually now have something called quiet dorms. They have dorms that are designated to be like, for most dorms you might have quiet hours, let's say between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. And by quiet hours, like where there's an expectation that you're not going to be noisy or whatnot. And these quiet dorms, it could even, those quiet hours could extend from 7 p.m. to like 11 a.m. And a lot of times a lot of college students sometimes resist wanting to go into the quiet dorms because they say that that's where kind of all the not cool people who don't party, you know, go. But I remember in filling out my roommate survey when I went to Tufts, and they said, you know, what kind of roommate would you like? And, you know, my motto was, you know, have your living environment, like the actual room you live in, be the quiet room. And you can always go out and find the party if you really need to. But I wanted to make sure that I had a roommate that was not a party animal, that was not, and I'm not, you know, I'm not innocent, you know, in that way. I mean, I like to have fun, but I knew that it wouldn't be a good thing to have my room be the hub of that, because then I'm really going to be out of sorts. So quiet dorms could be helpful, and for some kids, you know, even though it can be really tough for them, but if we're talking about the difference between failing out of school and not, parents can register with the disability services and request single rooms for these individuals. And I've seen that happen. And particularly for freshmen, it's harder. Schools really push back for freshmen because of the socialization. But if, again, you're talking about, look, this is a big issue, sometimes it's an issue of switching roommates. That I've had college students who, as much, even though their roommate could be their best friend, that they said that they just can't live with that person. And they could still remain friends with them, but it's very important that, and this isn't just for ADHD. I mean, I work with many people who struggle with bipolar disorder, and something like, sleep problems in bipolar populations can really make the difference of sending someone into a manic episode. So it's so important that they have to be on top of their sleep. And so I will often write, as their therapist to the college, the disability services, asking for certain accommodations, because this is really, this is not just an issue of, oh, I don't like my roommate because they're, they play the music a little too loud. This is, I'm dysfunctional if my roommate goes to bed like way too late. This isn't helping me.
But sometimes you think that it's also this problem that you talked about of, sleep is boring. I mean, for the first time, no one's around to make you go to bed. You don't have to get up necessarily for class. Why go to sleep? I think a lot of college kids just seem to say, hey, let's just stay up all night, and then,
absolutely.
Absolutely. My own daughter and sleep through class, miss all kinds of important things because finally sleeping the sleep of dead by whatever time in the morning.
Right.
But it's a
without a doubt.
issue.
Absolutely, and I think it's so important, when you, send your kids off to college, that has to be such an integral part of the discussion about sleep, and not to expect that your kid's going to be going to bed at 10 o'clock. I mean, there is something to be said about of regulating. It's all about, okay, if you're going to be up late tonight, okay, be up late tonight, have fun, go to the party, but let's not make it 4 nights in a row. Like, let's make sure, that you don't have, even 2 or 3 nights in a row. And certainly, if you're starting to miss class, if you're starting to fall asleep in class, then you have to be aware. So sometimes even having like a checklist of these are the signs of sleep deprivation, because unfortunately we are a sleep deprived culture. We're just a sleep deprived society. And so it's amazing to me when I work with 7th and 8th graders who are drinking coffee. That blows my mind. I mean, I didn't even see anyone drink coffee even when I was in college. I mean, I think maybe my junior and senior year people started drinking coffee, and I didn't, I joke with people, I had enough hyperactivity that I didn't need coffee until the birth of my first child. And then I started drinking coffee. But when you're in 7th grade starting to drink these highly caffeinated, and coffee is the least of it, it's these energy drinks that are even just damaging and terrible, that it's very hard for people to know who really has a problem with sleep and what is just normal. And so I think talking with your college, your child who's in college, to say these are the signs of sleep deprivation and this is how it can be, and if you start to see these, we really have to think about, and and to tell them that you don't expect them to be lame in terms of staying in their rooms all the time and not socializing, that it's like, no, of course you're going to have fun, but let's be thoughtful about how often you're doing it, and do you have to come in at 4 in the morning, or can you come in at even 2, like those 2 extra hours can make a big difference in sleep, just to have more of a mindfulness around it.
Yeah. Gee, we're out of time. It's so interesting. Maybe one last question. You mentioned sleep studies a lot. Do you, are they easy to find? People sort of wonder, how do you get a sleep study? Do you have to have a prescription? Are they expensive? I know sometimes they do sleep studies at home nowadays. They
do, actually. I would talk to your primary care physician.
Okay.
Most insurance plans cover it because it actually is sleep disorders and sleep problems actually are very economically damaging in the sense that problems that are related to sleep in our economy, it runs in the billions of dollars. So from an economic perspective, an insurance company would rather support a sleep study, which typically requires you go into the sleep lab at 9 p.m. and you're out by 6 a.m. It would prefer that than to put in the cost for all the consequences of sleep deprivation: migraine headaches, erectile dysfunction, depression, unemployment, I mean, all of those things. So you just talk to your primary care physician. They often make a referral. Insurance covers most of it. I mean, I think there's, depending on a deductible or a copay. And if you they can often, a lot of major hospitals have sleep labs in them. You go in, and they hook you up to all these wires. It feels really weird. You'll feel like there's no way I'm going to go to sleep, but trust me, you'll go to sleep. And they get all of this data that I have to tell you is just fascinating. It's just eye-opening, because I saw all this data and I thought, this makes complete sense, and this validates everything that I was feeling. Now, for children, parents can go with them and sleep in the room with them, but you're right in that there are some places that are doing home sleep studies where they can actually bring the equipment to the home and do it for people who have either too much anxiety or it might be hard. So I would definitely have people explore that. Certainly if you are a loud snorer, or if your child or spouse is a loud, like the kind of snorer that people are like, oh my gosh, you're absolutely get a sleep study, because the chances of you having sleep apnea are very high. That's the telltale sign. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a really useful session. Folks, please look back at attitudemag.com/webinars. You'll find all of Olivardia's slides, his contact information, and the audio of this session if you want to listen to it again. Big post for thanks to you. Fantastic. People are posting, by the way. And we hope you'll join us again. We'd love to have a session on food and dieting, because I think that's a huge issue for everyone with attention deficit disorder. So I hope you'll come back soon.
I would be happy to. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. It was our pleasure. Take care. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.